Pastor Shafer, the senior pastor here at Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Santa Monica, California, and this is Hope Matters. Each week, we talk to an interesting person from around the area and around the USA and even around the world on the theme of hope, because we believe that hope matters. Our guest today is John Maceri, who is the CEO of the People Concern here in California. And also, one way I know him well is that he is the chair of the Santa Monica Bay Area Human Relations Council, on which we both serve. Good to have you with us today, John.
Good morning, Eric. It's nice to be with you.
Tell us a little bit, John, our viewers are some California people, but there are people actually from all over the country and all over the world. I know the Bishop in Jerusalem watches these. So anyway, tell folks a little bit about the People Concern, if you would, please.
Well, the People Concern is a nonprofit housing and social service organization founded in Santa Monica originally back in 1963 by a group of community volunteers out of the church in Ocean Park. So our good friend, Reverend Janet McKeithen, is the pastor there. But it has always been a very activist congregation in social justice work. And so back in the 1950s, a group of volunteers were working to help their neighbors in the community. Of course, Santa Monica was a very different place in those days. It was primarily working families and working poor families who lived in the Ocean Park neighborhood around the church. And so it started off really as a drop-in center for people who were looking for housing and employment in the neighborhood. And then over the years, they responded to the needs of the community, and they did things that don't seem so novel now, like cooperative childcare for working families. Now we have preschool and Head Start programs, but in those days, if you went to work and you had small children, if you didn't have family members to take care of your kids, it often was a barrier to work. And so they started a cooperative childcare. They had a food pantry, and they had a bulletin board where people who were looking for housing and jobs could come. And it really became the place in the neighborhood that was the organizing hub for the community. And as the needs of the community changed over the years, so did then the Ocean Park Community Center when it was founded, incorporated in 1963. And today we are a multifaceted human services organization that provides housing and wraparound services to people experiencing homelessness as well as victims of domestic violence. So we operate the second oldest domestic violence shelter in the state of California. And the People Concern as an organization was formed 4 years ago in the merger between the Ocean Park Community Center, OPCC, based in Santa Monica, and LAMP Community, based in Skid Row and downtown. What a lot of people don't know is that Molly Lowry, who was the founder of LAMP Community, was actually one of my predecessors at OPCC. She was the director from 1976 to 1984. And then she always wanted to work with seriously mentally ill individuals in Skid Row. And so she left, and she always said that she took both what she knew and what she learned at OPCC to start LAMP Community. And she was, along with now County Supervisor Sheila Kuehl and former Mayor Judy Abdo in Santa Monica, and another group of very dedicated women, the core group of women that started Sojourn, which is our domestic violence program. So I say all of that really to say that even though we've become a large, multifaceted human services organization, we have our roots in community and believe very much in neighbors helping neighbors, and have maintained that ethos in our culture to this day. I'm very, very proud of that, to have come from the community and still see ourselves very much about serving the needs of the community.
About how many different locations do you have now, John?
Well, and so we operate a variety of programs. Right now we're fielding 18 field-based street outreach teams throughout the county of Los Angeles. These are multidisciplinary teams that have primary health care, mental health care, substance abuse services, as well as people with lived experience that go out every day in public spaces and engage people. We operate in Santa Monica an access center, 3 interim housing programs, 2 domestic violence programs, and then downtown and the east side, we have 3 more interim housing programs, a recuperative care facility, and then in the high desert in Antelope Valley in the north part of the county, we just finished a 14-acre therapeutic community there that has both interim housing, permanent housing, and wraparound services. And we're supporting about 2,000 individuals and families in permanent supportive housing scattered throughout Los Angeles County. So in terms of actual physical operating sites, about 12 currently, and then 2,000 units of housing.
Wow, that's a lot. I think some people, when they look at the homeless issue, they get overwhelmed, of course, and we understand that.
Yeah.
And that they also don't realize how many homeless people on any given night are housed in agencies like the People Concerned. We'd have what, double the amount of homeless on the streets if we didn't have these agencies, or more?
Yeah, so certainly the pandemic, I think, has laid bare the issues that all of us working on the front lines have known for a long time, which is of course, the solution, the ultimate solution to homelessness is getting people housed, and more importantly, keeping them housed. We've had a deficit of affordable housing for decades, so this was not a problem that was created overnight, and it's not a problem that's going to be solved overnight. However, with the pandemic, what we've seen is it's kind of raised to the surface these issues of the structural inequalities in our society, in the overrepresentation of Black and Brown people who are already rent burdened, even in non-pandemic times, people who tend to struggle to keep a roof over their head. They often tend to be essential frontline workers. And so as a result of all of that, they don't have the luxury often of staying home or sheltering in place, not going to work. And we've seen a record number of people losing their jobs and falling into homelessness. And the sad reality is in Los Angeles is that we house thousands and thousands of people every year. The problem is thousands and thousands more are falling into homelessness. So we have to, as a system, both address moving people who are currently experiencing homelessness into housing and keeping them housed, as well as turning off the inflow of people who are falling into homelessness. So we have to both address people's immediate needs as well as turn off the spigot, so that we are not continuing to have people fall into homelessness, which is contributing to the increase in numbers that we see everywhere. There's been just a huge explosion over the last several years.
Sure. So, John, what do you say to this well-meaning person who calls you on the phone, and I'm sure you get calls like this, who's just so overwhelmed and taken by the issue, but isn't a nasty person, and the person says to you, John, what can I do?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I get that question all the time, actually. And I appreciate the question because I think, I do this work for a living and I ask myself that question all the time. And I have family members. I have a 22-year-old nephew who's grown up in a generation that has known nothing but visible street homelessness in the magnitude that we experience it. That was not true when you and I were growing up, Eric. I mean, it's not that we didn't have people who were experiencing homelessness, but we did not have the number of people living on our streets. So it's a reasonable and fair question. And what I say to them is there's several things that you can do. Certainly you can support organizations like the People Concerned and others. There are many great organizations throughout Los Angeles County, the country, and the world, frankly, working on this issue. So financial support, volunteering, doing things within, if you're part of a faith community, to be active. And what Mount Olive has done with what began as Bruin Shelter is, mushroomed into a movement among being able to house students, college students experiencing homelessness. So there are many, many things. Now, not everyone's going to feel, that inspired or perhaps that ambitious to do those kinds of things, but you certainly can educate yourselves. I think that's the other thing, is that there is a lot of misunderstanding, misinformation about people experiencing homelessness, and a lot of assumptions that people are homeless because they choose to be, because they're lazy or shiftless, and what I can tell you is that, and I've worked with thousands and thousands of homeless people over the years, is that I have never heard this story of, someone has said to me, I had this great life. And then I woke up one day and I just decided to throw that all away. I had family, I had money, I had a job, I had a house. And I just decided I didn't want any of that anymore. And I decided to give it all up and go live on the street. I have never, ever heard that story. I've heard a lot of stories of people who say, I had a great life, and then this happened, and then that happened. And it's often a downward spiral. And so I think educating ourselves and understanding all the various ways that people become homeless and the paths that they travel to get there, there's a lot of cumulative trauma. So I think understanding that. I think, being the person who, when housing is being built in the neighborhood, don't be the NIMBY, be the YIMBY, the yes in my backyard. Be the person who comes out and says, yes, I am in favor of moving people indoors. We can't have it both ways. We can't complain about people living on the streets, and then when we want to house them, complain that we don't want housing. I mean, it's just simply an untenable situation. So I think that we can be part of that army of what I consider really the silent majority of people of goodwill who really want to see solutions and who can support those solutions. Locally in Los Angeles, we have the Everyone In campaign that's spearheaded by United Way. So there's ways to become an advocate, get involved in communicating with our elected officials and encouraging them to support policies that actually are focused on solutions and not just, continuing the problems, and working on systems change. So there's a broad range of ways that people can help. And I guess finally, I would say, Eric, that if nothing else, displaying just the most basic human kindness to people on the streets. I mean, what I often hear from the people that we serve is that when you're on the streets, and especially when you're on the streets for a long period of time, you feel like you're invisible, because there's a certain level of discomfort that many people feel with people experiencing homelessness. So they look away. There isn't any human contact. There's very little human kindness. And I'm not talking about giving people money or giving them things, just the acknowledgement, the eye contact to say hello, how are you? What's your name, if you're so inclined. And again, I know not everybody's comfortable engaging in conversations, but just to see people. And I will hear this so often where, people will say, I felt invisible. I felt like nobody could see me. And that's something that we can all do that doesn't cost us anything.
That's right. Thank you, John. Those are great suggestions. Of course, the other arena that you and I have in common, well, actually, there are a number of them, but the other one is the Santa Monica Bay Area Human Relations Council that you chair and I've served on for a number of years. And what should our viewers know about the Human Relations Council?
Well, the Human Relations Council is an all-volunteer organization based here in Santa Monica, and we have a broad cross-section of our membership. We have, people like myself in the social services sector. We have people like yourself in the faith community, and we have a broad representation there. We have people who have served in government. We've had some elected officials and other staff members who work or have worked, in government. And we have a lot of community volunteers, people who have been very active, in many cases for decades, in the local community, serving as volunteers in various capacities. And so I think and we have a very diverse membership in terms of race and ethnicity and life experience and age. And I think that makes for a very, kind of rich experience. And the focus of Human Relations Council really, over the past several years has really been to try and identify and lift up issues in the community that will address disparities, access to equal access to opportunities, and engage the community in ways that they feel like they can have a voice, particularly in underserved or underrepresented parts of the community. We facilitated dialogues where we're trying to help people who may have different points of view come together and talk about those differences, both to educate themselves, but also to help break down barriers. There have been, a lot of things that the HRC has co-sponsored, a lot of community dialogues that we haven't facilitated, that, for instance, at the Baha'i Center locally, where people of different faith backgrounds will come together and talk about, how faith communities can impact social justice work. So there have been a lot of things over the years that HRC has supported that I think and I hope really have helped our community kind of expand its efforts to be a more just and inclusive community. And certainly there's a lot of work to do. We know that it never ends, certainly.
No, yeah, you and I are both involved in the kind of work that never ends. So
No.
there it is.
Yeah.
But that kind of leads into the question of hope, being involved in the work that never ends, the homeless spigot which doesn't seem to end.
Yeah.
What does bring you hope, John, in your work, in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for me, there are a few things. Certainly in my work, I feel like I have the great privilege of watching people transform their lives. I often meet people at, if not the lowest, certainly one of the lowest points in their lives. And they've often, especially if they've been on the streets a long time or they've been in an abusive relationship for a long time, to see them kind of take those first steps and really watch the transformation. And from my perspective, it's miraculous. I mean, the human resiliency is phenomenal. Our ability to overcome trauma and cumulative trauma. And I mean, I've seen, some individuals in really horrendous circumstances, and to watch them walk on that journey and for us to walk with them, because we're very clear, we're not in the business of fixing people, changing people, or rescuing people. People fix, change, and rescue themselves. Our job is to walk with them in that journey and provide the tools and resources and support they need to make better choices in their lives, and hopefully to become their best selves, whatever that means for them. So on the work front, that is certainly something that gives me hope. Working with a very dedicated staff and volunteers who get up every single day, even in the face of the pandemic in the last 9 months, and they run towards the fire. I mean, we hear a lot about healthcare workers and first responders, and they are absolutely heroes in this effort and deserve all of our praise and thanks. But so are the outreach workers, and so are our staff working at the Access Center and keeping the public toilets and showers open, and who are making sure that people have access to medical care during the last 9 months. I mean, they suit up and show up with a smile on their face and do this incredibly difficult work. So I'm inspired by them, and I feel hope. And many of our staff are young, and so I see the next generation coming up behind us. The people who will carry the banner forward. In my personal life, faith is important to me. I sustain myself with the belief and hope that that we are all called to do this work because we are part of something bigger than ourselves, and we have an obligation and a responsibility. And so that is a driver for me, but it also gives me hope, because I believe that someday all the things that are wrong that we're fighting to right will be made right. Probably not in my lifetime, maybe not for generations, maybe not for centuries to come, but I believe that, and that's part of what keeps me hopeful and optimistic.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, this has been a very rich interview, John. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today, and thank you. This has been Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica, California, where we talk to interesting people from around the country and around the world about the theme of hope. Our guest today has been John Maceri, who is the CEO of the People Concern and also the chair of the Santa Monica Bay Area Human Relations Council, and a good friend of mine. John, thank you for being with us. We appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you, Eric. It really was a pleasure.
Good. So this is Hope Matters. We believe that hope matters, and we believe we have a God of hope. Hope to see you again next week. Thank you.